Yes, you.
The film opens with a scene of two travelers who manage to catch a sheep, and shortly afterward they are awakened by a man who arrives. It turns out the man's name is Josiah, a religious leader in the local village. Feeling guilty about their actions, the two strangers explain the situation and reveal themselves to be the governor's brothers-in-law, even offering to make restitution for the sheep they had stolen and cooked. However, Josiah insists that the thieves' punishment must be their own lives. Not only that, but he also continues to mock them both for their mistake. This makes one of the strangers very angry, and eventually bloodshed ensues at that location. The story then shifts to a married couple named Ramirez and Sarah. Although they led a very simple life, they seem very happy. The next day, Ramirez and Sarah went to the bank intending to withdraw their savings of $140. However, a bank teller named Hugh insisted that 50% of their savings would be deducted. He explained that the deduction was intended to cover storage and security costs. Upon hearing this, Sarah objected and continued to protest Hugh's policy. However, Hugh became annoyed and immediately brought up Sarah's past as a sex worker. Hearing this, Ramirez asked Hugh to respect his wife. In the end, Ramirez, who felt uncomfortable with the situation, was forced to accept Hugh's policy.
$2, $3, $7.
That afternoon, Ramirez and Sarah stopped by a general store to buy rice and a few other essentials. Seeing that Sarah was busy picking out clothes, Ramirez reminded her that buying clothes wasn't the purpose of their visit, but Sarah replied that she just wanted to try them on. Unexpectedly, the store owner Martin allowed her to try on the clothes. After escorting Sarah to the fitting room, Martin asked Ramirez for permission to step out for a moment. However, it turned out he intended to peek at Sarah while she was trying on the clothes. Upon returning from the scene, the store owner gave Sarah the item of clothing she had wanted as a gesture of apology. When they got home, Ramirez, who had just arrived, looked very upset because his farmland had been destroyed by a flock of Josiah's sheep. Without wasting any time, he and his wife immediately rushed to Josiah's house to demand compensation for the damage to his farm.
Pleasure to see that you and Sarah have finally...
May I speak with you for a moment?
After they explained the purpose of their visit, Josiah insisted he wouldn't pay compensation, arguing Ramirez had no proof that his sheep were the ones that had destroyed the farm. Realizing his efforts would be in vain, Ramirez decided to return home. That night, just as Ramirez and Sarah were about to go to sleep, they were startled by the sound of gunshots fired at their house. Upon checking, they found that their pet dog had been killed by the gunfire. The next day, Ramirez and Sarah reported the incident to the local sheriff. However, he didn't want to handle the case because only a dog had been killed. Furthermore, Ramirez hadn't seen who the shooter was that night.
Now get that stinking cur out of my... Now! Get it out!
Then while Ramirez was burying his dog, Sarah told him she was pregnant. Instead of being happy, Ramirez said he wasn't ready to have a child yet. This deeply disappointed Sarah, and she decided to go home first. The next day, while Ramirez was gathering firewood, he was approached by Josiah and one of his men. Josiah vented his frustration, saying he still couldn't accept that Ramirez had previously accused his sheep of damaging Ramirez's farm. He then gave Ramirez a chance to apologize and kneel, but Ramirez flatly refused. He felt Josiah had gone too far by ordering him to kneel. Hearing this refusal enraged Josiah, and he ultimately killed him. Meanwhile at home, Sarah seemed restless because her husband still hadn't returned after a day, and overcome by anxiety, she finally decided to search for him. Sarah then ran into Josiah and asked him about her husband's whereabouts, but Josiah claimed he didn't know where her husband was. The next day, a middle-aged man was seen heading toward New Mexico, where Josiah was located. The man's name was Cornelius Jackson, and he was the governor's right-hand man. Although he had a unique and extreme personality, Jackson possessed a strong sense of justice. Upon arriving in New Mexico, Jackson immediately went to the sheriff's office and surprisingly launched an attack. After he had finished beating up the sheriff, Jackson explained that the sheriff had now been officially removed from office. This was because the sheriff had been acting arbitrarily toward civilians. He then ordered the sheriff to leave immediately. Feeling humiliated by Jackson's treatment, the sheriff went to Josiah to ask for a job. Unexpectedly, Josiah took pity on him and agreed to give him a job. At the same time, Sarah continued to wait for her husband to return, hoping he was all right. And as the days passed, she could only conclude that her husband had left because he wasn't ready to be a father. Not wanting to wallow in her sadness, Sarah began to keep herself busy by tending to their farm on her own. However, while Sarah was resting, she suffered a miscarriage due to exhaustion and a heavy burden of worry. Meanwhile, at Josiah's residence, he was hosting a dinner for Jackson and several government officials. During the conversation, it was revealed that Jackson had become the local sheriff. He explained that the purpose of his visit was to investigate the disappearance of the governor's brother-in-law who had failed to return home. Jackson suspected Josiah of being the mastermind behind the disappearance, but had not yet taken action due to a lack of evidence.
No, I'm afraid, Sheriff.
May I borrow your knife? Two can carry. Santa Fe. Brother never showed up.
The next day, Sarah saw Jackson giving his horse a drink from her water supply, so she immediately called him out on it. Feeling guilty, Jackson immediately apologized to Sarah. After that, Jackson asked Sarah to let him know right away if she saw his brother-in-law, the governor.
Kind heart to offer them.
Shortly thereafter, Sarah, who was sharpening a knife, was startled by the arrival of Josiah and Hugh. Josiah told her that her husband had run away and would not return, explaining that this was because her husband was unable to manage their dry and barren land. Josiah then offered to take over the management of all of Sarah's land, and in exchange, Sarah could live with him. He also promised to provide for her and take good care of her. However, when Sarah rejected Josiah's offer, Hugh insulted her because of her past as a sex worker. This made Sarah angry, and she immediately kicked them both out. Not wanting his plan to fail, Josiah ordered Hugh to apologize immediately.
No need for violence. Violence is never.
Then, just as he managed to convince Sarah to lower her gun, he suddenly attacked her.
Away your sins, Sarah.
When came to after fainting, Sarah was horrified to discover that Josiah had violated her. Sarah could do nothing but remain silent as she lamented her tragic fate. Meanwhile, elsewhere, Jackson was scouring every inch of the ground in search of evidence of the governor's brother-in-law's whereabouts. After finding and retrieving a bullet from a tree, he resumed his search. Jackson, suspicious of a patch of ground where no grass grew, immediately dug it up, and how shocked he was when he found the body of the governor's brother-in-law had been buried in it. That night, Josiah was on high alert when he heard a commotion in the dining room. Josiah was then taken aback to find Jackson already inside the house with two human bodies. There, Jackson explained that these two bodies were the people he had been searching for all along. Jackson then borrowed Josiah's knife to demonstrate how someone had killed them.
No.
He then explained that Josiah's knife was a perfect match for the wounds sustained by these two men. Hearing all this, Josiah continued to insist that many people owned knives of that model, but Jackson, being shrewd, immediately asked for one of the bullets from Josiah's pistol. It turned out that Jackson wanted to compare the bullet in Josiah's pistol with the one lodged in the tree. Unexpectedly, Josiah's bullet turned out to be homemade. In other words, not a mass-produced factory round. Feeling cornered, Josiah flew into a rage and immediately kicked Jackson out. Before leaving, Jackson ordered Josiah to send the governor's younger brother's body to his residence. Josiah, furious at having been humiliated by Jackson, took out his anger by blaming God. This was because Josiah considered himself righteous and felt he did not deserve such mistreatment. The next day, as Sarah was about to head home after hunting rabbits, she accidentally spotted two of Josiah's men acting very suspiciously. Out of curiosity, Sarah decided to follow them. Sarah was furious when she learned that the body was her husband's. It turned out that Josiah had ordered them to take Ramirez's body to his house. This was because Josiah was worried that Jackson would find the body. After successfully killing Josiah's 2 henchmen, Sarah immediately gave her husband a proper burial. Meanwhile, elsewhere, Josiah was seen calming down a man who had demanded that Josiah return his wife. Not long after, Josiah received word from one of his men that 2 of his men had gone missing, and the man explained that he had only found their 2 horses. Hearing this, Josiah suspected that Jackson had captured them, so he ordered his men to go check it out. Meanwhile, Sarah went to see her mother to tell her that her husband had been murdered, and she also said she would seek revenge for his death. Unexpectedly, her mother supported her daughter's decision. Sarah then returned home and immediately set her house on fire. She did this to symbolize that the helpless Sarah was no longer there. Only vengeance remained. The next day, Sarah began her quest for revenge by going to the bank that had wronged her. There, she stated her intention to retrieve the $70 that the bank had previously withheld. Hub, seeing how beautiful Sarah looked, assumed she had returned to her old profession as a prostitute and confidently asked her to serve him. After successfully killing Hub, Sarah went to a store to buy a few boxes of bullets, but there she ran into a middle-aged woman who was waiting for her grandchild to change clothes. This reminded Sarah of the harassment she had suffered at the hands of the store owner, so she ultimately punished him. Shortly afterward, Jackson investigated the deaths of both Hub and the store owner, and he concluded that the same person was responsible for both. Meanwhile, as Josiah was preaching to the women, one of his men approached him. The man explained that Sheriff Jackson was not the one who had arrested his 2 men. He also mentioned that the sheriff's office was in an uproar over the deaths of Hub and the store owner. That night, Jackson was seen comparing the weights of the bullets as part of the ongoing investigation into the death of the governor's brother-in-law. Afterward, he met with a steel smelter to have the bullets melted down, hoping to determine their composition and trace their origin. The next day, 2 of Josiah's men who saw Sarah bathing in their river were overcome with lust and immediately approached her. Unexpectedly, this turned out to be part of Sarah's plan to eliminate Josiah's men.
Howdy, ma'am. Hang with your wash?
Sarah then went around hunting down the rest of Josiah's men. That afternoon, when Josiah discovered that one of his men had been killed, he was terrified. This was because he now had only a handful of men left. He immediately set out to check on the rest of his men, and to his shock, Josiah found that the others had also been killed. At the same time, Jackson was seen meeting with the steel smelter to obtain information about the origin of the bullets. During their conversation, the bullet smelter explained that the bullets found in Hub's body and in the store owner's body had the same composition: 97% lead and 3% tin. That composition is the factory standard. Meanwhile, the bullet found in the body of the governor's brother-in-law had a composition of 95% lead and 5% zinc. He was certain that this bullet was homemade. He also added that the bullet must have come from this area since the region is rich in zinc. After learning everything, Jackson appeared very grateful and then took his leave to continue his investigation. In the midst of his investigation, Jackson stopped when he found the bodies of 2 of Josiah's men lying on the ground. Just as Jackson was about to examine them, he was suddenly and unexpectedly attacked. When he came to, Jackson found himself tied upside down to a wooden cross. Josiah, who was standing before him, explained that he would let Jackson die slowly while hanging under the scorching sun. That way the crows would come and slowly tear Jackson's body apart. After Josiah's departure, Jackson asked Josiah's female followers for help, but instead he was beaten with a broom. At the same time, Sarah was seen in the yard of Josiah's house, and without fear, she continued to approach the house to exact her revenge. There, Sarah killed only those of Josiah's followers who posed a threat to her life. Unable to sense Josiah's presence, she decided to search the premises for him. Upon discovering Jackson hanging there, she immediately came to his aid. Then, seeing Josiah return home, she headed straight for the livestock pen to ambush him. Unfortunately, Josiah managed to escape the ambush, but Sarah, not wanting her revenge to be in vain, immediately gave chase and continued searching for him. Later, when Sarah was cornered by Josiah, she had no choice but to hide in the sheep pen. At the same time, Jackson, who had recovered, rushed to the sheep pen to help Sarah.
I did not see my daughter. She lives. Well, I enter in the spirit of peace, Sarah.
After the shootout between them, Sarah, puzzled by the sudden silence, walked around to see what had happened. When she saw Jackson lying on the ground, she immediately grabbed his gun. It turned out that Josiah had also been killed in the shootout with Jackson. But Sarah, not yet satisfied with her revenge, fired again at Josiah's body to fulfill her and her husband's desire for vengeance.